So 2 of the lines from our Women's Climate Congress values statements say, "We, a web of women, seek and support wisdom for the common good. And as holders of a great and universal desire to look after the young, we raise our voices, confident in the potential of women to lead positive change." So over the rest of today, we have 3 sessions which we have called Wisdom Conversations, because we're listening to the wisdom of women to explore some big questions. The first conversation this morning is themed "Why Women, Why Now?" And it tackles the question of why this is a time for women to come together to assume greater leadership and balance in decision-making and governance. Many of us here today are mothers, grandmothers, and aunties. All of us are daughters and granddaughters. Our bodies know the cycles of life. We are nurturers and fierce protectors of the young and carers for the sick and elderly. And yet we are still marginalised from decision-making, both in actual numbers and in our access to the real agenda setting. Our organisational systems and policy agendas inevitably reflect the men who have invented and inhabited them for so long. When we get to the table, we have to fit in as best we can with procedures and policy agendas handed down from generations who have inhabited these spaces. Men's ways of organising and their priorities are not wrong per se, but our organisational systems just seem to seriously lack balance. We know that women's leadership style tends to be more towards compassion, inclusion, and collaboration. And these attributes are essential in times of emergency when life is threatened. And we've seen some of that playing out in the COVID pandemic, I think. And history has shown that when women act together without the influence of existing political cultures, they have developed visionary plans like those of the 1915 International Congress of Women and subsequent International Women's Congresses. In the US, a women's caucus was formed in 1977 and facilitates bipartisan relationships and policy priorities among the women members of Congress, particularly in relation to improving the lives of women and families. And we have recently witnessed on the world stage some examples of transformational women leaders. In this conversation, we aim to explore how women's leadership and voices are coming to the fore to provide balance to our political discourse, to promote collaboration across political parties and reset policy agendas to prioritise care for the earth. And to help us, we welcome some incredible women to our conversation circle, who I will introduce to you very briefly in a moment. Over the day today, I'm not going to sort of read out the whole bio of each speaker because they're on the website, and I encourage you to go there and read them. So I'm just going to give you some short précis of that. Sadly, Christina Tulaco, who is going to join us this morning, is unable to join us at the last minute because she's dealing with a family issue, and our thoughts are very much with her for that. We're very sorry about this, both for Chris's sake and also because, as chair of the centre-right organisation Coalition for Conservation, a movement for conservatives who support decarbonisation and protection of the environment, and also she's passionate, and also as a passionate proponent of women's leadership, we were really looking forward to having Chris's voice in the room. Luckily, she has sent me some notes, and I will occasionally refer to these during the conversation. So our 4 guests this morning are Dr. Helen Haines, who can only be with us for the first half an hour. She's on a very busy day, sitting day in Parliament, who is the independent federal MP for Indi. Do you want to spotlight these people? Oh, Helen not here? Okay. We're still waiting for Helen to join. She'll be here in a minute, I'm sure. Before Parliament, she was a nurse, midwife, health administrator, and rural health researcher in Victoria's northeast. She's passionate about representing her community, action on climate change, integrity in Parliament, and many other things. Lycia Heath is CEO of the non-partisan, not-for-profit Women for Election Australia. With over 1,800 women registered for events in their organisation in the last 12 months, Licia is determined to increase the number of women of all backgrounds and lived experience in public office at local, state and federal levels. Professor Penny Sackett is an astrophysicist whose career has spanned 3 continents, America, Europe and Australia. As a former Australian government chief scientist, she was outspoken on why we must act now to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Penny is passionate about sustainability, transdisciplinary research, team building, community climate change action, complex systems, effective communications, and leadership during change and uncertainty, all things that I think was going to bring to this conversation. Dr. Anne Poelina. Okay. Penny, if you can hear me, can you turn your camera on, please? So Dr. Anne Poelina, who is in WA, so it's very early in the morning for her, is a Nyeekina Warra woman from the Kimberley region of Western Australia and traditional owner of the Murta Fitzroy River. She's a very active community leader, human and earth rights advocate. She's got master's degrees in public health, tropical medicine, education and Indigenous social policy, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Indigenous First Law. In the background here with me, I also have Barbara Bakey, who we'll bring on later, who's keeping an eye on the chat and will help us facilitate a Q&A session later. As I said, Helen can only stay with us for a short time, so I'm going to ask her to say a few words first in a minute, and then we will hear from Licia. And after that, we might pause for a little bit of follow-up before Helen has to leave, and then we will continue the conversation with Licia, who's staying, and Penny and Anne as well. So I might start with a question for you, Helen. Good morning. From your position as an independent politician, how do you see the parliamentary system playing out for women? Is it an even playing field? And what structural forms are really needed to be introduced to make it a fairer environment for women? How can women work together inside and outside of Parliament to help this happen?
Thank you, Janet. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
I hear Helen.
Yep, great, fantastic. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure and delight to be with you today. As Janet said, I'm in Parliament House, I'm on Ngunnawal country, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. Acknowledge the extraordinary leadership of our First Nations people in this debate on climate and more broadly around the culture of our nation. Janet, without a doubt, we need a more diverse Parliament. And the first step to that, I suppose, is to at least make sure that we have better representation of women in the Parliament. When I took up a seat as the member for Indi, I was the 133rd woman to have a seat in the House of Representatives since Federation, and those 133 women could not even fill the 151 seats available since Federation. So clearly we need to do better on that front. I'm most aware, of course, that gender is only one element of diversity, and we need to have a much more diverse Parliament of people from very different cultures, more representative of what the Australian population looks like. We need to have people from different backgrounds and expertise. I was originally worked as a nurse and a midwife. My qualifications then included a master's degree in public health and then a doctorate in medical science. I am the only midwife that's ever been in the House, and there's only 2 right now. I think actually being a midwife gives me, perhaps if I was to think to my Scandinavian colleagues, the description in Old Norse of midwife is Earth Mother. And so perhaps it's no surprise that as a parliamentarian, I am deeply concerned about our Earth, and I'm deeply concerned as someone from 30 years of healthcare around the impacts of climate and health. I also represent a rural and regional electorate, so I'm highly attuned to the impact that climate change has on rural and regional communities who are often very much at the front line of the increasing intensity and frequency of natural disasters, and we only have to look, of course, to our most recent bushfires. But likewise, I see the enormous opportunities for rural and regional communities if we embrace some of our transition opportunities when it comes to renewable energy, and knowing that in rural and regional Australia is where almost all of that transition will take place in terms of energy generation. I had a very great privilege of working with regional communities around the nation, including First Nations communities in the Northern Territory, around my bill for community energy, the local power plan work, whereby we put a lot of focus and effort into understanding energy security, knowing that First Nations people in many remote communities rely on diesel-based energy generation, extremely expensive, extremely unreliable. And I've been working very hard with this government to try to improve the opportunities to have energy security, particularly again in the face of disasters such as bushfires, where local communities lose power and subsequently lose telecommunications and health services and everything that goes with it. Are we getting anywhere, Janet? I think was part of your question in terms of gender equality and the place of women, and perhaps adding to that respectful debate in the House around issues as existential as climate change. Well, we're not getting there as fast as I would like to see. There's no doubt about that. I think we are still in a gridlock in this Parliament in able to engage in evidence-based policy without some of the emotive and disrespectful language that is bandied about the place. I think we've got a long way to go in terms of our parliamentary standards. As it turns out, today is the day that Kate Jenkins hands down her report into workplace behaviour and culture in Parliament House. I think there'll be many recommendations in that report, if taken up by the Parliament, and I sincerely hope they will be, that will improve the behaviour in the Parliament, and ultimately should improve political debate and good governance, and the formulation of the kinds of policies that bring us forward as a nation in an inclusive way, in a safe way, and in a way that increases prosperity for everyone.
I'm a slightly different sort of setup here to my usual, so I'm just remembering to do all the muting and unmuting. We heard everything that Helen said then, but we just have her picture has frozen. Will that be helped by a few more people turning off their video, Paul, do you think? Maybe a few more of you participants in the background could turn off your video and see if we can get enough bandwidth to... Hopefully you can still hear me though, Helen.
I can hear you loud and clear, Janet, and it could be a problem with Parliament House. Zoom is really difficult in Parliament House.
Right, yeah, I have heard that rumour in the past. So I just want to, as a quick follow-up to that, just maybe ask you a little bit just about the potential. I mentioned in my introduction about the Women's Caucus in the US, and I mean, is there any potential for women coming together? Can you see that happening in the Australian Parliament? And can we nudge that along at all as something for women to actually come together to consider policy or things that are of common concern, I suppose?
Janet, I would love to see that. I think one of our challenges at present is the hyper dominance of party politics and loyalties that both women and men have to the party. That holds back so much capacity to come together in the shape of something like a Women's Caucus. I would love to see that. I think it's really interesting at the moment nationally that we're seeing more women putting up their hands for election to the federal parliament as an independent rather than coming through the party process. I think perhaps that speaks to some of the tensions that women feel in being able to exercise their desire to speak together as women, in contrast to speaking as part of and behalf of a party. So Australia is a very, very two-party dominated federal parliament. And well, of course, it's no surprise to any of your listeners that I think it would be a very good thing to disrupt that by having a bigger crossbench and more independence in the parliament.
Okay, I'll just turn to Licia now to bring you into the conversation, Licia. And I learned actually from Chris Talako's notes that I mentioned earlier that the Interparliamentary Union statistics rank Australia 57th in the world for our 31% of female representation in the lower or single Houses of Parliament. This isn't just a local, but a global problem. Only 5 countries have at least 50% women. And interestingly, these are Rwanda, Cuba, Nicaragua, Mexico, and the United Arab Emirates. So that's I found that quite an interesting list. So Licia, as CEO of Women for Election Australia, you've already done a massive job to motivate women. Can you tell us a bit about your work and what drives you?
Yes, would love to. Well, look, we're a for-purpose organisation, and we're a non-partisan organisation as well. We have women from across parties or women who want to run as independents training with us. Right now, we have 153 women that we're actively training for the New South Wales local government elections that are in December, this coming Saturday. New South Wales is the worst state in the country, just for everyone who's on the call, in terms of percentage of female representation on council. It's woefully at under 30%. So that's something that we're trying to address. And, so much of what Helen was saying resonated with me in terms of our mission, because our mission is to inspire more women to consider running for public office, but it's also to equip them with the tangible skills that they need in order to run. Because how you would run for council or how you would run for a federal seat or Senate or a state seat, it's not always Canberra. When we talk about politics, it's not always about Canberra. There's lots of tiers of government, and depending on what you're passionate about, then a particular tier is going to resonate more with you than another tier. But how you run is kept very opaque. Some would say it's kept deliberately opaque. So our mandate is to make it more transparent. The idea that the more transparent you make it, the more likely that people are to step into it, particularly women, I would say, as well. So, and it's I guess a journey I have been on myself in terms of a career change, now heading this organisation and having led different campaigns at different times, or marching on Canberra or marching on state parliament, and just having that pin drop moment where I realised in some occasions we've been marching on these issues for 30 years. And the same faces keep looking back at us, patting us on the head effectively each time. And until we change the faces, we're not going to get movement on the policy. That was ultimately the reckoning that I had. And then I had the opportunity to run myself, Janet. I ran as an independent candidate in the Wentworth by-election, and I didn't win. But just by running, I impacted the outcome to the extent that the ultimate winner adopted my full policy platform. And that's a win. That is still success. So we have to normalise the way that we talk about politics in Australia. That whole notion that you can't get anything done in politics is an absolute lie. It largely is the only place you can get something done. The idea that it's toxic, why would I want to get involved? Well, when I ran, it was one of the most positive experiences of my life. The exact opposite of what everyone told me it would be, by the way. And now we've trained 1,900 women to run in the last 12 months. That's at all levels of government. A big focus on regional New South Wales. We ran workshops across rural and regional New South Wales in April and May this year. And the reason is, and I'll stop here, Janet, I think that's a longer answer than you were expecting. The reason, something I want everyone to consider on this call, very cognizant, this is the Women's Climate Congress. Women exhibit leadership every day, community leadership, running a local PNC, running the local ecological campaign, running the local business chamber, running drought relief, bush relief, checking on the mental health of neighbours. The list goes on and on and on. It is all volunteer work. It keeps us very busy, and it is very noble work. And it's 9/10 of the work that a good political representative does. So this thing I see time and time again, that we don't feel we have the skills for public office. I really want to challenge everyone that actually the skills you're exhibiting are exactly the skills that we want in public office. And Women for Election can help. You know, you're already doing 9/10. We can help with the 1/10, the information you need in terms of running. I'll stop there, Janet. Oh, and we're launching our event tonight, Janet. Sorry, that's something I should have mentioned.
Get this unmuting right in a minute.
Our Parliamentary Friends Group.
Thank you very much, Licia. And thank you really for all the marvellous work that you are doing. I'm just wondering now, while we've got 10 minutes more, while Helen is here, if my chat, if there's something coming up in the chat that we can toss based on what's already.
And I should just add, Janet, we're launching our Parliamentary Friends Group tonight.
I'm validating.
Can anyone hear me? Oh, you can. Okay. Well, while Janet's doing that,
sorry.
So there was a conversation about a caucus before. Okay. Yes, Australia is the only federal parliament in the OECD that does not have.
Pardon me, and I'm masquerading as Lynn Stevens, but there's been a really good question come up from Diane Collins that says, what can we do, each of us, to get better representation?
Maybe I could jump in on that one. Look, firstly, I want to say congratulations to
each of us do to get
an incredible number of people to be trained.
Representation in our electorates.
In our electorates, in our actual electorates, I think is, yeah.
Janet, shall I jump in?
Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, so I wanted to thank Licia for the incredible work she's doing in her in training women. That is, I can't underscore how important that is. So awesome. Look, if we want to make this work, we've got to participate. That's the bottom line. We have to turn up, and women turn up all the time at other things. And Licia just made the point. We turn up at parents and friends groups. We turn up in all of our community events. We do the work. We've got to turn up at these elections, and we've got to turn up in the lead into these elections. Individuals may not wish to run for office themselves, but they need to work with those who do. And if there are good women running, get behind them. Turn up. I just can't underscore that enough. Down in Indi, where we achieved what was considered impossible by breaking the big party nexus on what was always, since Federation, a safe coalition seat. The only way we achieved it was by thinking that we could do the impossible and getting out there and doing the work, and being brave enough to have conversations, political conversations, but to do it with a fundamental principle of respect and inclusion, and being our best selves. As soon as we knew that we didn't have to engage in ugly debate, in aggression, in nastiness, in that we could have political conversations in a safe and inclusive way, away we went. And you've just got to turn up, essentially, and do it in good faith, with good ideas. Don't just describe the problems, come with some ideas and solutions, and support whoever it is who is running that you want to get behind.
I might just jump in. I'm sorry, Licia, but before Helen leaves, because as a sort of corollary to this question, do you think women I mean, I have a sense that women are still sort of not quite fully aware how much they have been fitting into a system that's not really designed for them in the past. And one of the things that by having the Women's Climate Congress and creating a safe space for women to come together, we can explore our own space. And do you think that that's should be an aspect of this, the training that you do, Licia, or it's like a blinkers off moment that there's sort of been a bit of a con over the last 100 years that we've been come along and be represented, but the system's still the system, and it's not a system that we would design or that we maybe like to be in. I mean, can we somehow create a cultural change? I guess that's one of the big things that we talk about a lot in the Congress, is the cultural change that would really allow women to be autonomous within that system.
Yeah, look, there's a lot there. I think as soon as we say we need to change the system, destroy the system, the system is broken. I let those rip off my tongue kind of 10 years ago, and it's not helpful because people disengage when that kind of language is talked about, because I don't know how to rebuild a system. Democracy is broken. I don't know how to fix that. And I don't think democracy is broken or the system is broken. I think culture change can happen quite easily. There was a comment early in the chat. We have somebody here from the WA Parliament saying, as the gender parity has changed with the state election quite recently, already the culture has changed. There's a statement that somebody told me last year, it hasn't left my head. I think about it every day. The patriarchy can only work on the free labour of women. We are really good at giving free labour. And again, it's very noble. It is very noble, but gee whiz, it keeps us really busy. Keeps us really busy. And we do great things for our community, but could be elected doing greater things for our community and being paid for it at the same time. And this whole notion about, culture, but the culture's so bad. Well, firstly, it's not going to get better unless we do anything about it. I mean, come on, there's nothing else that we can. But secondly, it's not a massive change to be able to have positive impact on the culture either. And as we have seen, toxic stuff within politics, what happens is we disengage from politics. And when we disengage from politics, it gets more toxic. And then you're in a negative feedback loop. Okay. And I think we've all witnessed that in the last couple of years. That's what we've witnessed. What gives me extraordinary hope, not just, Janet, by you forming a Congress like you have, and there's other movements, because nothing is happening in Australian politics now that wasn't happening 10 years ago. The difference is now that people are paying attention and they're not looking away. That should give us all extraordinary hope. That moment, that's half the battle won, getting people to pay attention, seriously. But now, we have this opportunity, Christotunity, we call it, to step forward. And Helen's right, not everybody wants to run, okay? 50% of the women that come out the back end of our courses go, all right, I'm crystal clear now, I don't want to run. Because I don't think we gild the lily about the process at all. And it's not for everybody. But of those 50%, they're 100% dedicated on helping another woman get elected, because they now understand the process and they understand the team that it takes to get someone elected, and that how their skill set, whether it's volunteer management or marketing skills or PR skills, whatever it happens to be, how each of those play a role helping another woman get elected. So, it's exciting work, the work that we're doing. And the event we're launching tonight is our parliamentary friends group of women for election. So, and Helen mentioned it, we are not, we're the only OECD country in the world without a cross-party women's caucus. That is truly extraordinary. And there has been a couple of cracks at it before. And our group is not a replacement for a caucus. However, it's a start. What it is a start. We have 100 MPs, senators, ministers joining us online. Our launch has had to go online tonight. It was meant to be at Parliament House. And staffers supporting the work that we're doing out in the community. And we'll talk about the 3 forums that we're going to run next year at Parliament House, one showcasing our alumni, one showcasing overseas scenarios where caucuses have been set up in the last, few years. But basically providing a forum for women and allies to come together and discuss policies and collaboration on what are really non-partisan issues.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Thanks, Licia. It seems like the chanting is beginning and the humming has begun. Now, Helen, would you like to have a quick, where we're getting towards the end? Well, you're very welcome to stay, of course, if it's quiet in the house.
Thanks so much, Janet. No, I will have to go. Look, I'm really sorry that I can't hear from the rest of the panel. It's the worst part of the job, I'd have to say, is that there's so many opportunities as a member of Parliament to engage in debate in so many areas and to meet incredible people and to engage with ideas. And this is one such occasion where I'm going to have to jump out before I hear the ideas of others. So my apologies for that. I want to underscore, though, that women in the Parliament, the women that I interact with, are equally frustrated, irrespective of who they may be aligned to, from whether they're an independent, whether they're a member of a major party or a minor party. I think to know that women who have achieved election doesn't mean that it's all over here, that's for sure. There's a lot of work to be done, so much work to be done. I do take heart that shining a light on the problems that we've had here federally, and notwithstanding, as absolutely agree with you, Alicia, representation happens at all levels, and I can only speak to the one I'm in at the moment, but a whole lot of people chose not to look away recently, and we subsequently now have had a significant body of work undertaken by Kate Jenkins, and we will see the results of that very shortly, or at least the recommendations from that. Can I just encourage everybody listening? Cathy McGowan, who's my predecessor, said to me when I was vacillating about putting my hand up, Helen, being afraid is not a good enough reason not to do it. And I think that's very true. And in many ways, fear stimulates the flight and fight mechanisms in our body, and we get a burst of cortisol that helps us find the energy at times that we need to do something extremely difficult. But I want to say that one woman can't change the world, but many women can. And that idea of not necessarily being the one to throw your hat in the ring for election, but being the one who's going to run the campaign, being the one who's going to muster the troops, being the one that turns up and puts an arm around another woman to say you're doing a great job, are incredibly important aspects of what we need to get more women into positions in policy right across the board. I think perhaps what we saw last week in the Parliament, where my parliamentary colleague, the member for Bass, crossed the floor on an issue of principle, was one of the most encouraging things. I think that I have felt as a parliamentarian, and I know many, many others, and she did that not by beating her chest on Sky News after dark, not by grandstanding with threats of extortion and withholding votes. She did that on an issue of principle, and I think that singular move by a woman in the House shone a light on what it means to be a great representative last week. And the more that we see women celebrated for being parliamentarians who act on principle, the more we'll see other women saying, that's exactly the kind of place I want to be in. So I'll finish it there and really congratulate you, Janet, and your team on this Congress today. Congratulate you, Licia, on the event this evening. And again, I'm so sorry, Anne, I'm not going to hear what you've got to say today, and everyone else. And thank you so much to everyone. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Helen. So we have a whole shiny hour in front of us to continue this conversation and to bring in Anne and Penny, who I know are going to bring such lively conversation because we've had a conversation the other day. But some of us have been online now for an hour. And just before we launch into this next bit of the conversation, Barbara is going to just get everyone, we just thought maybe everyone would like to stand up and have a little shake off. And Barbara is a wonderful yoga teacher and she knows just how to get people active. So I'm just going to hand over to Barbara for a couple of minutes to get us to shake off.
Okay. As Janet said, I've been teaching yoga for quite a while and it's really important to activate your body. So we're just going to start by just shaking your hands and just getting a bit of movement into your body. And then doing it with your elbows as well. And then doing it with your shoulders. And of course, if you have any injuries, be very conscious of your body and just moving gently with your body. And then a bit of a shake out. And you can't actually see me, but I'm shaking my foot as well. So right foot up shaking, left foot up shaking, whole body shaking, whole body shaking. And then we're just going to do a big smile because we're all here today. And this is our first Zoom meeting and it's so important. So great big smile. And then a bit of a shake out again. And then just a bit of a turn, just a bit of a twist. And moving your body around and just letting your hands pull your body around, not moving your hips, making your hands do the work, pulling you around. And feel the air between your fingers and arms as you're moving around. And then a bit of a shake out. And that'll probably do us just enough. So just hoping you're feeling a little bit more energized. We might do that again later in the day. Just getting your energy moving again. So I'm going to hand back to Janet now to lead into the second half of this first hour.
Thank you, Barbara. I just feel so much better. So we've so far been thinking about the why women are part of our question, I guess. And there's also another part, why now? And we all know that action on climate change is really, really urgent. And the next decade is critical for action, as has been spelt out in the IPCC report Code Red. If we don't stabilise the climate, our younger generations are going to be facing severe climate consequences. And of course, climate change is only one part of all of our environmental woes, which Anne Paulina might pick up on later. The way we treat our land and our country is not good. And if we keep going the way we are, we won't have an inhabitable planet. So the government decision makers do not seem to be referring to the science and the expertise of the client scientists in the way that they have with the health experts in relation to the management of the pandemic. And we have real threats to our survival. So just with some of those thoughts in mind, I'm going to turn to Penny, who's as I said in my introduction, is an astrophysicist and a former Australian chief scientist. And so you were engaged with both the science and the policy. So I guess you have better understanding, or as much understanding as the rest of us, if not better, than of the real urgency of the current situation. So I'm going to ask you to sort of respond to our theme, why women, why now, as what you see about this urgency and the special role that women might have to play. So I'm going to hand to Penny. Just unmute.
It's over here. Got it. Technology. Look, thank you, Janet. Thank you and all your team for organizing this event. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to you today from Narrogong, Ngunnawal, and Ngambri land. And I acknowledge the care that they've given for this land, and I want to particularly acknowledge that and pay respects to their elders. I thought I'd like to weave something into this conversation, both as a climate activist, as I've been called, sometimes to my surprise, and as an astrophysicist. I guess the thing I wanted to say about being a climate activist and what that's meant to me is that I have found, I believe that all of our struggles, including climate change, including all of those that we could name today, are rooted in the same false belief that we're not connected. And what climate change is showing us is that we are connected. What we do is connected to the earth, and earth will connect that back to us as she is doing. So climate change is happening because of the false belief that our actions are disconnected from the earth systems. Prejudice is rooted in the false belief that we're not connected to each other, even though we are through our histories and our DNA. And extreme wealth disparity thrives on the false belief that those wealthy billionaires are somehow disconnected from the toil and the sacrifices of millions of us. And I wanted to mention that up front, because if that's true, and if all the ills of the world are rooted in the false belief that we're separate, then when we act to produce change for better anywhere, we're helping to heal and reconnect the whole. And not just the issue we're working on, but all the other issues that it's connected to. And it may be that that connection and that recognition of connection, that recognition of the cycles through which our bodies go as women, menstrual cycle, the bodies, the cycles of the land, the cycles in the sky. It may be that women as a whole tend to be more aware of that connection and those cycles. I could talk to you, and if you like later, I'd be happy to talk to you about the extreme urgency of climate change. I'm sure you hear a lot about that in the news. And as I was listening to some of our previous speakers, I heard two things that I wrote down, and I wanted to insert them now to connect into this conversation. And one was, don't look away. We were advised to not look away to what we see happening in Parliament House. Well, that applies to the climate as well. As difficult as it is, we can't look away from what's happening. And also, being afraid is not a good enough reason not to act. So that resonated with me as a climate activist too. And I guess before I turn back to you, I'll just say a few words about being an astrophysicist and how that's informed the way I think about this. You know, astronomy is an observational science. We're called observers. We can't experiment, we just observe. We listen, we watch. And so one thing that astronomy has taught me is the value of listening and watching. It's also taught me the truth that is expressed in humility. The universe doesn't orbit the earth. The sun doesn't orbit the earth. The cosmos doesn't orbit the rest of us. The sun is just one of trillions and trillions of stars in the Milky Way, one of billions of galaxies. We now know that there are thousands of planets around other stars, not just those that are orbiting our sun. But I think that this makes our planet, Mother Earth, and the life on this planet even more special, not less so. Not because we haven't detected any life around those other planets. I'm sure it would be a vast waste of a universe if we were the only life on it. Let's just say that. But no, I think our home, Earth, is special for three reasons. One is because the planets orbiting those other stars are unthinkably far away, so far away that they're unreachable in a human lifetime. The second is that they wouldn't support the rich diversity that we know here on Earth. And third, our Earth is special precisely because it's part of a larger whole. And that gives us a sense of awe. And I suppose summarizing that, I would say that what that all means is that the Earth is special because it's ours. And we are the Earth's. That's what makes it special. We belong, we're a family, we need to take care of that. And that urgency is there because over especially the past 200 years, we haven't been doing that. We haven't been taking care. Compare in climate change, which has largely happened over the last 200 years. Compare that to the 12,000 years that agriculture has been flourishing since the last ice age. Compare that to the at least 40,000 years that Aboriginal peoples have taken care of this land. Compare that to the 300,000 or 600,000 years that Homo sapiens have walked the earth. Compare that to the 4.5 billion year age of this planet. And you can see that what we've done in 200 years has been massively destructive to a planet that has subsisted with us and without us and thrived for billions of years. So I hope that brings a little focus into the why now without going into all of the urgency that I'm happy to talk even more about with regard to climate change, fossil fuels in particular. But I did just want to mention those few points, the interconnectedness, cycles, and the short length of time in which we have made a very negative impact on an Earth that belongs to us and that we belong to. So I'll maybe just stop there for now, Janet. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Penny. And when I listen to you speaking like that, and when I hear other people speaking, and there's this sense of awe, this deep connection to Mother Earth, the custodianship idea, over 40,000, 60, 100,000 years that Indigenous people have looked after the earth. And then I find myself asking, well, why can't these emotions and deep spiritual connectedness, I suppose, be somehow in the discourse that we hear in our governance systems, so that it sort of is informing? And is this something that women can bring more? So I'm going to turn to Anne now, Anne Poelina, who is joining us from Broome. Just before, I'm going to read out something from Chris's notes, Anne, because she'd done a lot of work, Chris, and so I feel like I could honour some of the lovely points that she made. So in her notes, she said, the UN Climate Change Executive Secretary, Patricia Espinosa, said on the International Day of Indigenous Women this year that Indigenous women carry the knowledge of their ancestors while also leading their communities into a resilient future. When Indigenous women engage, climate policies and actions at every level benefit from their holistic, nature-focused knowledge and leadership. So when we were planning this conversation, you asked me if you could come in last so that you could reflect on what you'd heard, Anne, and share some of your thoughts about women and First Nations leadership and the environment.
Right. Mabugimbi, ngajinu nilo walan palina, ngayu imad waramanen, ngamanda jara nyigana nganga in Jugan and Yaru country, ngayu Broome, my home. So yeah, good morning, Janice, and good morning, my fellow panelists. It's wonderful to see you here. We've been on a journey of dialogue across many months coming to this point, and I think it's very interesting at this point in time why women are rising and why now, and particularly with a focus on Indigenous women. And what I'm saying is that Indigenous women have always risen because we're part of a natural helping system that is so critical to where we need to go, not just as Indigenous people, but as our nation and as our planet. So from my perspective, there is a lot that we can do together. And for me, it's not so much about looking at, what we can't do, but what we do. And we are very good at dreaming, and we send the dream out and we actualize the dream. So from that perspective, particularly around Indigenous women, I mean, one of the things that we were talking about was the fact that in terms of leadership, particularly within the parliamentary system, that what we're talking about is governance at so many different levels. I think one of the things that many Australians may not be aware of, but when we were looking at constitutional reform for Indigenous people, we were also looking at constitutional reform for local government. And this is such a critical element in terms of not just empowerment of ourselves as individuals, but what I look at is a balanced approach where the intent is communityism and multi-species justice. So this conversation about local government really needs to be a serious conversation. One of the things, having been in local government and recently just running for local government and missing out by 2 votes, was the fact exactly what somebody else said. It was about recreating relationships, because it's all about relationship. And even though I didn't get into the Shire of Derby West Kimberley, it allowed me to meet the leaders who are standing and who were voted in. And we created trust, we created respect, we created the opportunity for dignity to hear multiple views of how we need to work together to protect communityism. So this is one of the things I'm saying, is that for Indigenous people, we don't separate and we don't go, oh, this is male or female. What we see is the collective good of our whole community, Indigenous and not. So when we are born as Indigenous people, we are given a totem, a judinj, an animal creature that we are bonded to for life. My totem is the blue-tongued lizard, and beautiful Honey, who's sitting on the panel, actually sent me a painting of my totem. So what that does is it teaches us that governance needs to be flat. It needs to be horizontal rather than hierarchical. That what we're saying is that even factoring well-being, we need to think of our non-human family as well, because they teach us to be fully human. So for me, it's not so much about gender issues of male versus female. Really, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is values and ethics, and how we bring that into framing what good governance could look like, what it must look like. And so from Aboriginal people, we lived in this land, we were the first everything. All of the first scientists, the first engineers, the first astronomers, the first architects, the first, all of these things. And we came from a world where we always saw ourselves as belonging to a world of we, not me. So we learned that very much that we have, and we continue to have, a world where we call it that it was self-regulation. You may hear about it as polycentric governance, a allodial title, the absence of Lord, where everyone is equal under first law and everyone is subject to the law. So Indigenous people come from a world of an allodial title where we had the absence of lords, where we were equal, where we came together and we formed first law stories that included animals to teach us how to be subject to the law, how to live in a world where we had and negotiated a code of conduct where we thought about the greater good of the we, not the greater good of me. And so it is a gift to be a human being, to see with our ears and to listen with our eyes. And that's what our elders have taught us. We are observational as well. We are taught very, very early to look up into the sky and look down into the ground. What is the environment teaching us? So we learn very early that there is diversity in lifeways and livelihoods. So for me, it's not about feminism versus masculinism. It's how do we see the world through a world of an ethics of care, of love, of attention, of peace, of balance, a world of pluralism, because when we talk about climate change, my people coexisted with the Anthropocene. We shaped the Anthropocene. We lived in the Ice Age. We worked in harmony with it. And in 150 years of where I live, when I read the settler diaries of how they came to my lands and waters, and they saw a world of utopia and peace, and within 150 years, that has been totally imbalanced. So what we're seeing is we really need to be making the transition to a just energy transition. We as Indigenous people, we care about people working in oil and gas. They have families too. They need to be part of the upskilling, the uptooling, the transition from the fossil fuel energy to the renewables. You know, somebody said to me, oh, we've got this amazing free energy. It's nuclear energy in its greatest force. It's called the sun. So we should be, as leaders, really getting behind all of these types of developments and making that just energy transition. We are not isolated from the world. We are planetary citizens. And so it's very, very important that we must see this in the global context of what we do. We must think and be considerate about how do we create peace, one with nature, two with Indigenous people. So we have to understand that climate change, we are dealing with complexity. We need collective wisdom. And as Indigenous voices, Indigenous women's voices are not at the forefront of looking at how we deal with complexity and come up with the solutions for planetary well-being, we will not be able to right-size the planet. So it is about fusion. It is about an ethics of care. It is about love, about bravery. It is, as Alicia says, being brave is what is required to be a good and decent human being and stand for our people, stand and be accountable. It's not just about accounting, it's what counts. And so we are living in a world where I really believe that we need to go back to what we as Indigenous people held in this land, which was a world of regionalism, a world of place-based governance, a world of cooperation, not of conflict, a unity pathway to share information, to have informed consent, and to be challenged. The biggest challenge to me is to be the sacred gift of life for all life, particularly multi-species justice. There should be no othering. We should be bringing in Indigenous wisdom in this land into how we not just right-size governance and government, but what can the new economies be? What should they be? And what we're saying is, as Indigenous people, is that particularly in the Kimberley, Indigenous women are rising. We are forming an Indigenous Aboriginal Women's Council in the Kimberleys under the leadership of June Oscar. And this has come about over the last couple of years of planning, but now all of the legal requirements for that are being formalized and brought in. And what we're saying as Indigenous women is that we are not othering our Indigenous men. We are bringing our Indigenous men in with us, but women need to rise, because what we're seeing is the failure of many, many Indigenous governance organizations, the concept of neoliberal thinking, where it becomes about the me and not the we. So Aboriginal women in the Kimberleys are rising. We are forming an Aboriginal Women's Council. There are many women interested in a whole range of different types of government, governance, parliamentary positions. But we also live in a state that is also very, very scary, where it looks like we have a dictatorship, where we are getting rid of the upper house so that voices in the regions will be muted because we will have centralization of power. We have introduced a bill into Parliament that allows us to create bills on the run if it's for the greater good of the state under the disguise of COVID. So we need to think about where we're going as a state, as a nation. We need to be brave and challenge these systems that are failing us. We need to think about what is the law of the land, and the law of the land is a declaration of interdependence. Everything and everyone is connected. When I talk to my non-Indigenous friends and colleagues and people I meet, I say everything is place-based. Local government really needs to look at how does it transform to a greater form of regionalism, because what the model of local government has shown us is that we have over the last 10 years had to have forced amalgamation. So I think regionalism is a real big push from my side. I'm very, very concerned about the removal of the upper, the Legislative Council in the upper house in terms of having that space to have diversity of views, to bring in the people that just come in by the click of, hey, you just were on the last bit of the count and you now have a seat at the in the parliament. We need diversity. As I said, we are dealing with complexity. We need collective wisdom at the table. We need to be able to look at how do we bring all of these different forms of systems thinking to be able to right size the planet. So for me, as I said, really what we're looking at is the collectivism, moving from the individualism back to the me, and from the me to the we, that we all have a role to play, that we care about our fellow non-Indigenous family. We want you and we believe you are a part of this country and this nation. You are so critical in terms of the reconciliation, the healing, the peacemaking that needs to go right across the land. But for Indigenous people, we cannot have peace while we continuously have invasive, unjust colonial development. So what we need to think about is how do we collectively mobilize a just energy transition? How do we support those people working in oil and gas? How do we make them the priority for upskilling and uptooling? How do we look at policy that can really challenge government by having big private and corporate investors taking the risk, as we are seeing that they are doing, because we are failing at so many levels of government and governance? So for me, it is really about how do we get this fusion? How do we stop othering Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous wisdom? How do we help their voice to rise? How do we bring them into the decision-making processes that ensure justice and equity for all, particularly for our non-human family? So as I said, this is about first law, law of the land, not law of man, and it is and must be a declaration of independence. And we nationally and globally need to challenge ourselves in regards to, one, how do we create peace with Indigenous people and with nature? And all of us can learn and share and grow and learn to be fully human. And all of us can give people a hand up so that they can reach their full potential in any area that they wish to go in. So from that, it's a wonderful opportunity to share. I mean, I've got to know Penny and Alicia just quickly, finding out what they're doing and how they're pushing the boundaries and really extending that. But at the end of the day, we are faced with the most, unheard of a circumstance where I believe women can lead. When we're talking about climate change, which is turning into climate chaos, I believe women's leadership is critical for giving planetary health and well-being a climate chance. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And that's very inspiring and very energizing to hear you speak. And it makes me think, at the beginning I said we want our movement needs to be wide and deep. And I suppose in terms of just connecting with women and encouraging women to stand for government, and a lot of the work we've been doing in the Women's Climate Congress, just connecting with women in all the different electorates, is part of the wide part. But what you're talking about now is the deep. And I suppose, how do we connect the women who are coming, who have this feeling in their bones that this is what's needed? How do we connect them in this deep way in these conversations, so that we can actually make some transformative change along the line in the way that you're talking? So I'm just going to give Alicia and Penny an opportunity to respond to that if they'd like to, and then we'll see what's happening in our Q&A and our chat.
Look, I could listen to Anne all day, so I was using the reactions, love heart claps the whole time. So I think, look, the only thing that I would want to in terms of a response is in terms of our own work at Women for Election, and yes, local government is of critical importance, and too often it's dismissed as the roads, rates, rubbish, can't do anything now. I mean, it is such a critical part of our democracy in Australia. And in terms of sustainability, ecological sustainability as well, it's critical, and it's the closest form of government to community as well. So in terms of seeing immediate impact and getting great satisfaction, you can't do it better than in local government. We have a partner organisation called Politics in Colour. I put a couple of links in the chat. It's gone, it's long ago now. Two of our board members who stepped off last year to form Politics in Colour, which partners alongside us and running similar training workshops and conferences as Women for Election, but specifically addressing the additional barriers that women of colour face when they run for office, and all those workshops are delivered by women of colour. And we have done, it was an online event in the Kimberleys, 3,000 COVID years ago. I can't remember exactly when that was. I think it was March. And so, because it's important, the diversity of voices in our parliament is not going to be solved by assisting just more white women lawyers into our parliamentary chambers. That is not the answer. So that is the only other thing that I wanted to add in terms of our partner organisation, Politics in Colour. Penny, did you have any comments?
Thank you. Yes, it's very difficult to speak after Anne because the flow and the words and the thoughts are so connected and so compelling and so spiritual. But it does give me an opportunity to thank her and to also comment on something that she said that particularly struck me. And that was that, if I have this correct, women are good at dreaming and at acting out that dream. And I like to connect that back to climate change and in a way to astronomy. I'm going to just read a few brief sentences that were written by a science journalist, but they were inspired by Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. Now listen to this and see if this is your dream. These are the words, quote, "Humanity faces two possible futures, one of gradually growing scarcity, dwindling resources, and continued pressure on the living ecosystems of the earth, which are probably already being driven toward collapse. Whether that begins this century or next is really a moot point. It will eventually come. The other is one of abundance and expansion, where we continue to power our civilization with plentiful energy, reduce most of the harmful impacts of our dirtiest industries on the biosphere, and usher in a new astonishing age by reaching out and reestablishing our mining on other planets in the solar system." Unquote. Now, I don't know about you, but I think it's a small mind that can only think of those two possibilities, that can only dream of those two possibilities. That is the total collapse of our Earth ecosystems, or the other option, sending our polluting industries to the rest of the solar system, putting them on Mars or something. Can you imagine having such a small imagination that those are the only two things you can dream? I think that most of us here can dream of something that's much better than either of those two. And that is taking care of what we have and what we value. And so I wanted to thank Anne for reminding us of the importance of dreaming and of acting on those dreams. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Penny, for that beautiful response. And I'm sure that Licia and Anne have probably got thoughts bubbling up now, but I'm going to turn to Barbara, who's here helping, looking at the chat, to see if we've got some questions coming up from our 135 people that are online here.
Thanks, Janet. Yes, there's been a lot of chat, which has been fantastic to see, and there's been a lot of questions around politics. There's been a lot of discussion about raising women, and a comment from XR in the ACT was that politics is broken. And I think, Licia, you had sort of some comments about it's not broken, but so if you'd like to address that.
Yeah, I honestly believe it's not broken. However, I do have sympathy for why people might think that it is. So let me just take a step back. I took a sabbatical off my career in 2017 because I wanted a new career, something more altruistic, but I didn't know exactly what that was going to be. But I knew what I wanted to do was to solve Australia's political landscape. Just that little problem. So I gave myself 1 year. I had a big whiteboard in my office, and I set about meeting with all and sundry for that year. I met with politicians, I met with staffers, I met with retired politicians, I met with people in the service, I met with heads of think tanks and policy producers, the far left, the far right, the ones in the middle. I had a flow chart going. I was saying, well, why aren't we executing on policy in this country? Why is that not happening? Is it because we don't know the answers? We don't know what the policy should look like? So I was investigating that. And then it became very clear, no, actually, we know exactly what needs to be done in terms of public education reform, in terms of climate policy, in terms of tax and superannuation reform. It goes on and on. It's not because we don't know what needs to be done. We do know what needs to be done. Okay, so why isn't policy coming into place? Because we have an execution problem. Okay, so policy isn't being executed on. What's that about? Explore that a little bit more on my flow chart. And then it became apparent it's not being executed on because of the individuals that we have in this case, federal parliament. It's because of the individuals and how a number of them are beholden to vested interests. Not all of them, okay? Not all of them. There's an extraordinary number on all sides of politics that are very, very decent individuals trying their best, looking to their left and looking to the right, and then looking out to us and going, where are you? I need help. So I don't think politics is broken. I do feel it's a bit sick. And I do feel like the antidote is engagement and people like us getting involved. And I'm going to challenge out at the moment to everyone. So everyone just put your flak jacket on for a second. If you feel you're not being represented, it's probably because you're not. And a big part of that reason is because us, the normal people, can I just call us that for a moment, the moderates, the everyday people, have chosen not to get elected. Just let it sit for a second. So when people like to say to me, Licia, there's so much more religious people in politics than there ever was, much more than in the common, than in common everyday community. There's much more this or that. And I say, well, they've chosen to get elected. And now they get to make the decisions. It's uncomfortable, but it is part of the problem. Now, what I'm seeing is that this reckoning has, has come to pass, as is evidenced by the number of women that are trying to attend our courses now, quite frankly, more than we can cater for at our current capacity. Women are mobilizing. They've made that realization. But saying politics is broken helps more people to disengage, and it doesn't provide a solution. So I don't think I'll labor the point beyond that, but
Thanks, Licia. And we're watching the wonderful Voices For movement, which seems to have been getting a lot of traction lately. And it seems like that is a space where women particularly seem to shine in that space. So
again,
that's
a
very
lot of
encouraging and hopeful thing to see women coming into their own, maybe not being constrained by the party politics and being able to really shine in that space. But would Anne or Penny like to respond to this question about politics being broken, or shall we move to another question in the...
Maybe move on to the next question, maybe.
I think they're saying...
Okay, well, there was a number of questions along the same line of politics, and Mary was talking about a political economy that's based on reciprocal relationships, which also Anne was talking about relationships and how important they are. And Phoebe also talked about kindness, emotions, and human relationships. That's the blind spot. So I guess the question is, how can we unblind that and bring that into the politics? How can we move from where we are to a system where it's much more about relationships and engaging on both a regional level and national level?
Anne, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. Oh no, just to make the disclaimer that it's all about relationship. It's all about that. It's about connectivity to each other, human to human, diversity of critical thinking. And this is what I said, it's about collective wisdom. We're dealing with issues we need to put on the table and go, okay, what is it today? How can we all wrap around and bring our multiple worldviews, our experience, our pluralism into framing whatever we're unpacking? So it's not to be too fixated on any particular thing, because as I said, we're looking at systems of governance at the individual, at the community, at the systems level. What I'm finding in my state is that the level of violence that I see perpetrated on Indigenous people is structural violence, systemic racism. The laws and the policies are not fit for purpose, and we must stand to the challenge and look at how do we really lead the way. When these submissions come out for comment, we need to have our voices there. We need to bring our thinking and our wisdom into how do we right-size these systems so that we can have justice and equity for all. So for me, it's about how do we get the rules right? How do we look at what justice means? I mean, today there will be an open letter sent to our Premier because our Premier has introduced a bill into Parliament under the COVID process to look at Aboriginal cultural heritage. That bill is not fit for purpose. There is no Aboriginal leader that I know in Western Australia who says this is the way that we should be going. All we can see is destruction of our lands, our living waters, our sacred sites, and it's for the greater good of, I don't know who, but that's what we're sold. So we have to stand to the challenge. We need to look at these. We need to be in those conversations. As Alicia says, these are political processes. We need to understand them. We need to navigate them. We need to find other women who have different ways that they can bring their wisdom into how do they influence these sorts of systems thinking. So, you know, we've got, you know, laws being created on the run. We've seen centralization of power. We've seen local government voices being muted, even to the point that I was very interested that for something so profound as our basic democracy, it is not compulsory. And so, you know, it was very, very interesting in the little experience I had with the Shire of Derby, 500 votes within a place that's almost the size of beyond Tasmania. And so we need to get our process. We need to stand up to the challenge. We need to stand, we need to show leadership, but we need to wrap ourselves around diversity, because with that diversity, we can unpack this complexity and we can find a way to dream new dreams and to stand in those dreams and to make them come into our reality, because we want to lead them as women who have and are born with an ethics of care and love, because it's innate, it's embedded in our DNA. We come in as nurturers, as carers, as natural helping systems. And this is what we're saying, is that it doesn't matter what issue we're talking about in our communities, in our states, in the government level, it should be about the word that I used earlier, communityism. It should be about the greater well-being of our communities where we live, place-based governance. But we are challenged by these laws, and these, public policies that are no longer fit for purpose. They're not fit for purpose for Indigenous people. They're not fit for purpose for our environment. And what we're seeing is that this is a great shame for a country that espouses to be a lucky country and a fair go for all. So we have to stand, we have to be accountable, we have to push the boundaries and see where we can bring our younger people with us. So I think, as I said, it's all about dialogue, but not just dialogue for dialogue's sake, dialogue with the commitment for transformation.
Thanks, Anne. And I'll come to Barbara for another question, but I might just throw in that one of the things we'd really like from this day is some of these ideas that we're sharing now to form a platform for some further action. And what's going through my mind now is how can the women in Anne's community and Leisha and her organisation and the Women's Climate Congress and Women in Science, how can we work together? How can we bring these threads? I mean, this is part of the, being wide and deep, but, how can we really bring these things together? It seems to me that we're talking here, we're really onto something, but we need to somehow bring these threads together to actually create the transformational change that we are all so longing for. So I'm trying to think, planting that idea then, so that when we go away after today, we can keep thinking about how we could actually continue to work together. And before I forget, I should say that we've got quite a few local council people online. I keep meaning to mention that because we invited all the women who were mayors, and some of them have come, and there's a number of local councillors as well. So the messages you've been sharing about local councils, I hope they have been useful for those people that are in our audience here today. So I'll just Penny, did you want to make a comment then?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that from my perspective, I think one thing that we can do to bring into what politics and actually all realms of life is just to be your whole person and be genuine. And what do I mean by that? It comes from, I suppose, when I entered the political realm as chief scientist, I was told that that I shouldn't be political, that I shouldn't have political views, that I should be objective as a scientist. And now when you're trained as a scientist, that resonates with you because you've been taught to be very objective and to stand back and just listen. But I came to realize that that was only allowing me to be part of me. I am very much of a scientist. I identify as a scientist, but I identify as a lot of other things too. And that was actually muting me. That was actually pushing me back and telling me that there were certain things that I couldn't say, I couldn't think, I couldn't discuss. I was there just to, provide the facts, ma'am, kind of thing, without any context, right? Without the human context, as if politics, politics and people, they come from the same word. Everything is people, everything is politics, everything is science. And so I think that one thing we can do is begin to become whole again and not allow ourselves to be divided into these different silos because it actually mutes us in a way. It prevents us from speaking our whole truth, I guess. So I just wanted to add that as another perspective that I've felt being a scientist in a political world. Thanks, Janet.
We actually had, on one of our monthly conversations, we had two wonderful women scientists, Angela Maharaj, who's the president of the Australian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society, which is the peak sort of society for climate scientists, and Melissa Hart. And they talked to us about the Kindness in Science movement, which is another movement that is being sort of initiated by women to bring these ideas of kindness into how we do science, how we think about science, how we support our peers doing work. And in the conversation, we also talked about, well, we should have a kindness in politics movement and a kindness in economics movement and everywhere. So, is there another question before I go on too long?
Yes, there's lots of chat, and which is absolutely fantastic. So keep your eye on it, because there's some really fantastic comments and I can't capture them all. But there's also been quite a bit of discussion about intersectionality and needing to sort of broaden the base, not only for women, but for much more diverse views in Parliament. And also Di Kersby was talking about disengagement at the moment, you know, with COVID, that there's been quite a bit of disengagement. And I guess the question is, like, how do we engage women more in moving from that volunteering where we see women everywhere, you know, football and so on and so on? How do we do that? And also, to a great question from Tony Hansen that says, how do you propose engaging gender, seeing more women in politics, etc., and recognising the structural issues behind gendered violence while being intersectional and inclusive of all people, so we don't just emphasise gender, but make it much more diverse views. So big questions there. So I'll hand it over to
I might take
Yeah.
a couple.
We're running into our last. We're running into our last 5 minutes now, so maybe everyone can have a response to that beautifully bundled up discussion, and it's very, very rich in the chat. I can see that too here where I've got mine. So Alicia, did you want to?
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. You will see us launch, it'll be a soft launch before Christmas, but there'll be something in the new year as well about rebranding power. And I'd love you all to share it when you see it. It's going to include a TV ad, and it's going to include ads in the papers and all sorts of things. This concept of rebranding power. Think about the imagery about power currently, you know, Putin bare-chested on a horse, people saluting in front of an army. You know, this is the imagery, people in penis-shaped rockets. Like that is the imagery of old world power. I would call it old world white power. And this whole idea about rebranding power like you've never seen, the power that is humming away all the time in our communities, every moment. The power that women show every day in leading their communities. Rebranding power to the power that we want to see in the future. That the courage in leadership, empathy in leadership, providing psychological safety in leadership are very feminized traits. They don't reside only in the feminine world, of course they don't. But it is the power, it is that power that we need, you know, if we are going to move forward as a collective with harmony with nature as well. The second piece that I just wanted to add on that was normalizing about how we all talk about politics. My French friends think it's hysterical when they're at a barbecue with their neighbours here next to me, and they start talking about politics, and they kind of get shut down going, oh, we don't do that here. We are very odd in the way we talk about politics in Australia. Culturally, it is a problem. And the way we culturally discuss politics is part of the reason that we don't have broader involvement in it as well. So we need to normalise what it is to be a politician in this country. And when somebody says, you know what, I think I'm going to give it a crack at the next state election or the next local government election, sometimes our visceral response is, why would you want to do it We have to train ourselves to go, how can I help you do it? We want you in there. So, and now I'll pass over to Anne and Penny.
Yeah, look, I've listened to all of this, and I think I'll go back to the concept that Penny took up, which is we can dream, and we must dream, and we must dream big. We are planetary citizens. We must help Mother Earth to right size. This needs all of us. And what I want to give a plug for is, yeah, reach out. There are Indigenous women out there who are leading transformative change. They may not always be publicly profiled, but they are doing very good work. So watch out for the Aboriginal Women's Council that's rising in the Kimberley. We are doing this, and we are also rising up with our men. So we believe that we can dream, we must dream, and we must send the dream out, and we must actualize it. So from that perspective, dream big, girls. This is a world waiting for all of us to be revolutionary. We cannot afford incrementalism anymore. Mother Earth needs us. We must stop the misogyny to Mother Earth. We must stop it now. And we can rise. We will rise. We are rising. There are 100 million women in a club somewhere in this global world that is being led by all of us. But let's dream big, because we must bring our brothers, our sons, our husbands with us. And just in closing, I just wanted to go back to that little concept that I have, is that we need to fuse both. We need to be tough and have those tough challenges, but we need to be soft and kind and generous and humble, and do this with dignity and love in our heart. This is a beautiful nation. We are all standing together. We must rise and save our planet for our young people. They are living now. They are not in the future. They are living now. They have needs now, they have wants. And I believe the leadership of women is rising across the planet, across the nation, and we are doing good work. Thank you.
Penny, do you want to? No. I'm actually tearing up hearing all of you talk. Sorry, am I okay? Oh, sorry. No, I think she's good. So I'm actually tearing up listening to you all speaking and those wonderful messages, and it gives me great hope that if women can rise together and we support each other and we look across the country at what different groups and women are doing, we can come together and we can make a difference. So it just remains for me to thank Alicia, thank Anne, thank Penny, of course also thank Helen for joining this session today. And yeah, just thank you very much. I think it's been a very rich and enriching session. Thank you.